Really, I don't think people were massively afraid of the virus or anything like that, because we're like, it's still seen we're not really affected by that. It was kind of just seen as something we had to do. But then the more time that went on, the more people got worried about the other things going on, or like the effect they had. And also because people were just so alone, they didn't know how other people were feeling, they didn't know whether they were different, and that kind of isolation just sat in quite quickly. So I think people got more worried and more anxious, but not about the virus, just because of the nature of the situation they were in. I think a lot later on, after we'd written the book, people, like November and stuff, people our age got a lot more worried about it, but in the first lockdown they really weren't. Just because of the nature of the age, where you don't really want to be with your family. Like, you don't mind your family, but you wouldn't choose to be with them. All of the fun you have is with your friends, and you're not allowed to see your friends. Like, there were a couple of nights where it's like, oh, you don't have to, like, a lot of people enjoyed kind of having a messed up sleeping pattern, like going to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, like that kind of freedom. But it wasn't ever kind of seen in that way, because the holiday we were supposed to have, we could never have. So yeah.
No, and we sort of talk about that in the book, don't we? We quote this one girl whose initial reaction to having the exams cancelled was like, yay, and then she realised that actually everyone else was really shocked and worried about it, and then it sank in. And that was the thing, I think, and I think there was a real underestimation by adults of the effect that this would have on students at these points, you know, these kind of summative assessment points, whether it was GCSEs, A-levels, degrees, you know, whatever, where it wasn't just the exams, the thing they've been working to, but that whole kind of point in their lives. You know, you could say, well, that was just unfortunate, you know, I mean, there's bigger problems to think about. But as Emma says, the problem was that it wasn't just that the exams got cancelled and that, you know, schools got closed, which initially would, I mean, I thought it would be an extended holiday. It was a couple of weeks before the Easter holidays anyway, and then you think, oh, well, maybe they'll go back after Easter. That never happened. But it was that sort of sense of kids not being able to do anything else either, because at 15, 16, you know, you can't work, and that suspicion of young people that developed really rapidly meant that those things that young people wanted to do often, which was to get involved in like volunteering to help for their neighbours. You remember right at the beginning there was that real kind of swell of social solidarity, but that just, the stay-home order just meant they couldn't do that. So they were basically just sort of locked on their own in their bedrooms with their social media, and having been told their whole lives you shouldn't be spending too much time on these devices, this time they were told, oh, well, look, it's great, what's the problem? You know, and I think that was quite disorientating for everybody, wasn't it?
Yeah, people just became so reliant on social media, and it just became so inescapable, and I think that's one of the most damaging things that didn't leave either. When people got back to school, people just kind of felt that social media was their safety net, but then they got such a distorted picture of what everything was really like. Everything kind of became less real and kind of a lot more insular than it had been before, because you didn't have that reality check you would have when you were at school.
And a lot, I mean, maybe it's a bit strong to say kids became desocialised, but a lot of them did become nocturnal, didn't they?
Yeah.
And I talked to a lot of parents whose kids weren't waking up until like 1 o'clock, and then they were going to sleep at 3 or 4 in the morning. And this was partly, I think it was an attempt to sort of establish a bit of independence from their families. But it was a very strange thing, you know, if it had been a couple of weeks, you'd be looking back and say, oh, wasn't that kind of a bit of an adventure maybe, or a bit of a grim time, but we're over it. But it just dragged on and on and on for, I mean, how long was it that you were out of school in the end? 5 months? You know, 5 months really until they went back in September.
But summer was different, so I don't think that kind of insulation was that long. What I found is a lot more people use like Google Meet and Zoom. So I know a lot of me and my friends, especially in the second lockdown, were having like Zooms on Friday nights, and that was that was great, because that was a lot more like you're still talking to people, and you still have the kind of, you have everyone in one room, but you don't on Instagram and like Snapchat and the more like stereotypical what we would see as social media. It doesn't, because you can't have the same conversations you would have, and everyone gets to choose what they see. no, choose what they show you, and you can't, so you don't get to see what's going on in other people's lives apart from what they decide to show to the world. So it just becomes so separated and fragmented that you can't have the same connection with people that you would have in a room, or conversation you would have with individual people. You don't have the same conversation with different people, and that's what kind of was expected through social media. So I think at the beginning it was just no one knew how to navigate it, no one knew how to use it in almost a real sense, because it had its purpose and it almost wasn't supposed to go beyond that, but people were expecting it to.
I was surprised actually when we wrote the book how many of the young people Emma talked to said they use this phrase real social interaction. What I miss is real social interaction, which is interesting because if you look at a lot of the way that young people and social media is talked about, there's this sort of idea that for young people social media is normal, it is real social interaction, that is their life. And what became very apparent was when deprived of that context, they really missed that buffer that you got from those interactions with each other, and the spontaneity and the taking the edge off things, and just bumping into people and having to be with people all day rather than choosing to be involved in various discussions and stuff. So I think that was an interesting kind of, I suppose, corrective to the notion that young people's world is just social media. Yeah, I think there's a real danger of, in a lot of the discussion, kind of talking about how kids will be sort of marked by this whole experience for life and everything else, which I think is, risks creating a trap of its own, and I think there is a thing where young people are kind of, they're quite resilient, they're forward thinking, I think it would be wrong to just sort of keep them locked in that kind of almost like the mental lockdown forever and go around saying, oh, your life is ruined by all of this and everything. But I do think there's a sense which, I experience from the young people I know, whether, at home or at university, where there's a wariness about taking anything for granted. There's a sort of an insecurity, which isn't unique to young people. I think we all feel a bit like that now, where suddenly when all of these things can kind of be shut or go, or just little ways in which you interact with people can be outlawed, and I think that that's going to have some kind of lasting effect, certainly for a few years, because it's sort of, I don't know, it's true to say it's unprecedented. It's not been done before.
Yeah, the insecurity I think is big, especially with, as you can, we can see in schools, with the fact that it's been a year, but there's nothing the same, and almost nothing the same in school as there was a year ago, and it's like there's no idea of when it's gonna go back, and that kind of idea that, are you ever gonna have, it doesn't seem like we're gonna ever go back, but we don't really know where we're going, and that kind of complete loss of security I think is gonna have quite a big effect on people. One of the biggest difficulties coming out of the lockdown was, how much are they allowed to, how flexible are they with the rules, how forward are they with the rules, and that's not kind of gone away. And it's not just now with the COVID rules, but social rules and expectations of how much people go out got completely disrupted because they became so formalised in a way they aren't normally. So I think that's had one of the biggest effects, because people aren't as able or as comfortable to read people or ask people or kind of flow with people. It's become a lot more rigid and disconnected from each other in a way that I think just wasn't before.